Hey there. Today we'll talk about whether you should choose a single or multi-tenant architecture. What do these terms mean? A multi-tenant architecture is a typical one where you have one instance of your service, you have one backend, you have one database, one load balancer, and so on, or one set of these which are shared between all customers. That's a multi-tenant architecture. There are multiple tenants on your system. A single tenant architecture involves spinning up a separate instance of your entire service, database, backend, load balancer, skews, everything. And to accommodate multiple customers, you would set up multiple instances. And obviously, this applies only for B2B. If I create an account on, let's say, Notion is not going to spin up a separate service for me as an individual. It's only for companies, B2B. So, with this context in mind, let's look at some pros and cons. In general, having multiple instances of your system comes at a very high cost, which people often don't appreciate. So, they lock themselves into a bad decision. So, if you're not sure, you should err on the side of having a single instance of your architecture that accommodates multiple users. Why is that? First, multiple instances require more DevOps work. You may even have to hire more people for this, whether backend engineers or DevOps engineers. It's not going to just happen automatically, right? Because anytime you do something that costs manpower, you have to budget for it. The second downside of multiple instances is that they can diverge. The versions of software can diverge. Let's say you are using a version of RabbitMQ that is known to have a memory leak and you upgrade it. You might still have it elsewhere, right? So now you have different clusters or different instances using or running different versions. It's called version skew. In fact, some of the versions may even be outdated and unsupported and have security holes. Or they may crash in ways that other versions don't crash in production. The architecture can also diverge. I've seen a startup where one instance had a database slave and the other didn't. So when you have so much divergence, best practices won't be uniformly applied. So we came up with some guidelines on, let's say, RDS. These guidelines were not applied uniformly to all the RDS instances because that was multiple times the work that we didn't have time for. Documentation also falls short. There could also be a divergence of configuration, the parameters. I have seen customers receive commitments, or I've seen salespeople make commitments to customers based on incorrect documentation, or documentation that was correct for one instance of the service but not another. As it is, documentation is hard and poorly maintained in most companies. Don't make it worse. There are real consequences. Having multiple instances also opens the door to having custom features for each customer, which is a slippery slope you shouldn't go down to. Whatever you build, you should build it in a scalable way with one code base. A feature may not be used by a particular customer or it may not be enabled in a particular plan. That's okay. Maybe some features are reserved only for the enterprise plan. That's okay. But you shouldn't have multiple code bases, multiple Git branches, and so on, which are diverging. Again, this becomes easier to violate with multiple instances. All of the things I talked about have an opportunity cost. If you weren't building multiple instances, you could use that time to build more features or fix bugs or scale your system so that it keeps pace with business or make it more reliable, or build better APIs, or do many other things. So, all these decisions need to be looked at in comparison, not in isolation. Not should we have this, but do we want this instead of something else? Like budgeting in finance, right? If you buy a laptop this month, maybe you can't go on a vacation. Which of the two do you want? Unfortunately, I've seen people, even founders and leads, functional leads, not kind of understand this concept. They look at each concept, each decision in isolation and ask, should we do this? But then the engineering team becomes overloaded and slows down. So consider the opportunity cost before setting up multiple instances. Definitely don't do it for scalability. If your existing code doesn't scale, creating a second instance of it is a very hacky ad hoc solution. I wouldn't even call the people who do that engineers. They're more like code monkeys, copy pasting things. You should fix the scalability problems, because one is it's less work. The other is, even if you create multiple instances, each of them can still suffer scalability problems. So you're not really solving it. You're just creating double work without solving the problem. Another downside of multi-tenant architecture is you can't have self-serve, where people go to the website and just sign up. And typically you would do it only for high value customers. You should not set up a separate instance of your service unless they're paying you at least $100K a year to account for this overhead. Only for big customers. Or people who have data residency requirements, like someone needs the data to be in Germany, let's say. So these are all the factors to keep in mind before you choose a single or a multi-tenant architecture. If you'd like my help in aligning your architecture to your business goals, my consulting link is in the description. And if you found this useful and would like to learn more when I post a new video, consider subscribing to this channel. I post only things relevant to consulting clients of mine. Thank you.